Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. A wild Daytona 500. A lot to talk about from the race winner, ninth to first in less than a full lap. We also have a brief recap on Formula E and World Rally Championship. We have Tanner Smith from Pitbox Press joining us today. A big thank you to our Patreon investors calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Link in the video description. And our updated Buy Me a Coffee YouTube super chat. Jason M bought us a cup of coffee. A super chat yesterday. Tied with Amber JJ on the leaderboard. And Lori Smith is now on the leaderboard, our newest YouTube member. You too can invest into Grid Network through YouTube, Buy Me a Coffee, or Patreon. Link in the video description. I will thank you on the air and encourage everyone. Share your thoughts and opinions because I think Tanner and I, we're going to have a lot to talk about with this Daytona 500 and a very historic win when you look at the big history of this Daytona 500 race. Richard Petty, Cale Yarborough, Sterling Marlin, Denny Hamlin all have won this race 2 consecutive years. I still remember when Sterling Marlin did that, 94, 95, his first 2 career Cup Series wins. Well, now William Byron is on that list. And Byron, last couple of years, it's been like he starts off good, but then he just fades away. Jackson Todd talked a lot about that in his 2025 predictions. And you look at his season last year, Daytona, Coda, Martinsville, rest quiet. Do you believe William Byron is on track to have a better season than last year, Tanner?
I don't, and that's only because I want to stick with my preseason prediction that he is going to have a slumping year. I just didn't see a whole lot out of Chevy this weekend as a whole to really give me a whole lot of confidence that they're going to be very strong at any of these super speedway races. I mean, Byron was running like 5th or 7th or something coming down the backstretch and got the benefit of a very unfortunate accident in order to win this race. Like, he didn't really have the speed to contend, and that's why he was 7th to 9th for most of the event. Obviously, this is more of a temperature check on how good the Chevys are going to be on super speedway style tracks such as Atlanta, Talladega, Daytona. So it's not really a clear indicator on how their performance is going to look at one of the more commonly seen facilities such as a Martinsville, a New Hampshire, a Charlotte, if you will. So I can't really say anything as far as like what his season will look like just yet, not knowing what the performance on track at more common facilities are going to look at. But I will say there is nothing greater than kicking your season off with a Daytona 500 victory. And if last year is any indication, he could go out and win the first 3 races and then just not be heard from again like last year. So, and that's something that Jeff Gluck suggested last night. So I guess in all that, I don't think this is going to be a precursor to how his season continues, but it's really too early to tell.
Too early to tell. The way this race worked out for him, as you mentioned, if Denny Hamlin, Cole Custer, and all them did not make contact, we'd be talking about a different race winner most likely. One of those 3, or if they did make contact and you had some sort of scramble exiting turn 4. Overall, I feel when you look at the drivers that have won this race 2 consecutive years, they've done it where Sterling Marlin, he had a fast car in 1995, could not be beat that first race with the Monte Carlo. Denny Hamlin, really good at super speedways. William Byron, it's just sort of the seas parted in front of him. He got around that crash. He got the win, but the big thing is he put himself in that position to get that win once the mayhem occurs, which we always seem to expect at Daytona. And overall, I almost got a sense there might be pressure on him to perform because now it's like, okay, you got this Daytona 500 win. You got Rudy Fugle again. You've been to the championship for the last couple of years. We want to see the wins like you had 2 years ago where you had I believe, 6 wins that season.
Yes.
And he just seemed to lose steam at the playoffs. I think there might be a little bit more pressure. Like, okay, you got the Daytona 500 win. Let's build up, get some more wins. So if he has a slump year, that's going to be really interesting just to see how that's going to change. I don't think it's going to be anything drastic like Hendrick's going to make any big changes. They're probably just going to say, well, it could be one of those years. And of course, the Hendrick organization, a lot of resources there. But it's going to be just very interesting to see what happens long term for William Byron, because I feel, like you said, what better way to start the season off? But I almost get that sense like, okay, we want to see more than 3 wins. We want to see you really get in the championship for because you won the Daytona 500. And one thing that'll be interesting to follow with this race, of course, that last lap pass because of the big crash. That happens. Passes, I guess, multiple times. That has been a big topic of discussion because we know the way this race ended, we still had cars crashing as William Byron was ahead of Tyler Reddick. They let them race to the to the start finish line, get the checker flag, then the caution, the yellow flag came out. I almost get a sense when the crash started occurring, and I thought, okay, we saw what happened at the duels, the Xfinity race, the truck race, and then there was no caution at all. I almost felt lost. Like, what am I expecting from NASCAR? Are they going to throw this caution? Are they just not race back? Do you get a sense that there is a reasonable sense of frustration if there's a last lap crash? We almost don't know what NASCAR is going to do with the caution, whether they're bringing it out or not bringing it out, because that seemed to be a very big topic yesterday.
I genuinely don't know where to begin with this question because there are so many factors that go into it that it's almost overwhelming to talk about. So the way I look at last night's incident in particular is I don't see how freezing the field would have changed the result of that race very much. Reddick never really got a chance to catch back up to Byron, and I'm not sure even if Hamlin hadn't made contact with him coming down at the end of the backstretch, that Reddick would have been able to catch Byron just by himself. So I don't really understand not throwing the caution there when it didn't really affect the outcome versus on Thursday night when Eric Jones was, 100 feet from the line, and they threw the caution, and Austin Cindric is awarded the win instead, even though he didn't cross the line first. I do sense some frustration from the fans because the whole track last night was blocked by the time that I want to say Cody Ware and a couple other cars kind of started to angle up the track into turn 3. Practically the entire track was blocked and most of the field was caught up in that collision. So I'm at a loss because I don't really know what we do from here. I have had some ideas on how to change how we end these races. And the one thing I will say is that I know that the track was blocked, and honestly, I feel like that should be a caution. At the same time, that's pretty much halfway around the racetrack from the finish line. So the drivers that cross the finish line will have ample time to slow down before they reach the debris field. So the likelihood of any sort of additional incident happening while safety workers are on the track is pretty much null. There is no risk of that happening. At the same time, though, like you said, Riley Herbst was a driver that got, kind of wiggled out of line there at the last minute, and was, I would say, probably like 5 to 7 seconds off of the pack by the time that crash started. And I mean, I would hope that his spotter was taking care of him throughout that whole sequence, but at the same time, you can't always just leave it into the hands of the teams. That's what officials are for, et cetera, et cetera. So at the same time that I would have liked a caution to have been thrown, because I don't think it would have mattered to the end result. At the same time, I also feel that was an instance where safety wasn't going to be adversely affected by what had already happened, if that makes sense.
Overall, I would have to say I agree, because we didn't see like I think of a few years ago when we had that last lap crash where Michael McDowell won, and you saw, I believe it was Keselowski, when he went to the wall, got hit, a big fireball, caution came out. There was still some hits, particularly Cody Ware going from the bottom up to the top. I thought, okay, that could be a caution. I just feel like NASCAR has made it so hard for them to do anything with this. Even when they've done the overtime line, that white line on the back half, and if the caution comes after that, it's over. That didn't work out. The Brickyard 400, which then eventually that got changed. And I think just with what happened at the dual races, where people were just so frustrated, like you were this close to the start finish line. Eric Jones, you should have let them race. But again, well, there was some big hits on the front stretch, the walls, all that. I just feel this is just so hard for NASCAR to try to regulate. And when you do, you're just going to have situations where, because I kept thinking, if NASCAR had just thrown the yellow flag right away, some fans will be saying, well, they did that. Tyler Reddick could have gotten around William Byron. I think it was very unlikely. He did not have another car directly behind him to push him around. It's just one of those deals where I think at the end, probably NASCAR was just, okay, let's just try to keep it green. And then as soon as they crossed, caution flag was out. On social media at Grid Network TV on X, we did post a poll. Did NASCAR make the right call and let the lead cars race to the finish line on the last lap of the Daytona 500? 75% voted yes, 25% no. Encourage everyone to share your opinions about everything, because at the end of the day, I just feel, as someone that sort of is just anticipating, okay, I know how the rules work, and it was just, okay, I don't know what's happening. It would be nice to have a little clarity, but just different crashes, different circumstances. You just don't know overall what's going to happen. And overall, when it comes to the Daytona 500, I feel those are two big points everyone's talking about. William Byron getting his second consecutive Daytona 500. The big crash, of course, there was a couple other big crashes. Same time this race, we did have the unfortunate weather delay, an hour and a half, then a brief delay when they were about to go racing again. Then that red flag for Ryan Preece, which I know we'll talk overall about that again. How would you think this Daytona 500 went overall? Do you thought it was a good Daytona 500?
It was fine.
Yeah.
I thought it was. I do think that when it comes to ranking a race, you have to consider the ending of it at an elevated value compared to the other 201 laps. And when you have a race in the way that that one did, it really just takes the wind out. I mean, we had last year a rain-delayed race in Kansas, and we were able to finish that one, and we got one of the greatest finishes in NASCAR history. It was fantastic between Kyle Larson and Chris Buescher. So, sometimes those rain delay races can happen, and they can produce an exceptional result. This was not the case. We waited through an 8.5 hour broadcast to watch the leaders wreck themselves on lap 202 and watch 4 cars struggle to like keep up with each other at the finish for the last half of a lap. I don't know about you, but that's just not ideal for me personally. As a race fan, I did not enjoy the ending of that race or really any of the last 30 laps. I found that the lack of green flag pit stops throughout the race for debris cautions, for debris that we never saw on camera, was a bit problematic. But yeah, I mean, all in all, the race was fine, but I don't know. I'm feeling a bit hollow after it, to be honest with you.
You bring up a really good point. Without the green flag pit stops, we didn't get to see that strategy element of what the manufacturers were going to do. What was Chevy going to do? What was Toyota, Ford? Like we saw in the dual races where the Fords, they stayed out longer, but then that caution came out, upsetted their strategy. We didn't get that, and both debris cautions, debris in turn one, according to NASCAR, never shown. I am a little concerned. I don't know. Now that we have some of these changes with the damaged vehicle policy, vehicles going out there with duct tape and all this stuff, if we're going to see a little bit more of these debris cautions. But it did, I feel, ruin the aspect where it was just, okay, everyone's going to pit. Now there's no fuel strategy. It's just where you come out and where you end up with the pack. And while it's visually looks great, that 3 wide row after row after row, if you're in the middle of it, you're stuck. You just can't go anywhere. You can't the only way you could get around is if somebody in the other lane loses the momentum, then you shoot up and try to take the lead of that lane. And we saw some drivers do that. Surprisingly, Corey LaJoy was pretty good at doing that most part of the race in that 01 car, leading some laps. But I have to say, it does feel like it was just sort of didn't really feel like it was a complete race. And to me, Joseph Newgarden had tweeted on X, he wants to see 1990s super speedway racing, which, hey, those were some good races, but at the same time, I know I've already mentioned his name, Sterling Marlin. The way he won his first Daytona 500 was him and Ernie Irvin. Just the two of them way out there. Ernie got loose. Sterling slipped by. That was the winning move. I just sometimes wonder would fans really appreciate if we had something like that, or are they just expecting what the Daytona 500 has become is just this race of survival now? Because throughout the race, we were seeing the commercials for IndyCar, the Indy 500. If anybody just watches NASCAR only and decides, oh, I'm going to check the Indianapolis 500 and I've never watched it before, very, very different race. You almost can't compare the Indy 500 to Daytona 500.
No, you straight up can't. Not anymore. Like the race has lost, like as far as the product itself, the prestige is gone. Like it's been gone for at least the last 10 years. How long has it been? 2017 since we saw a race truly end under regulation, under green at Daytona, at least at the 500. And that was a really great finish with, cars running out of fuel. And, a lot of people are not big on the whole fuel thing, but it's funny because we saved fuel all last night and it never mattered. It didn't matter one time. So, I'm starting to lose a lot of value in this event being a crown jewel, honestly. I know that sounds sacrilegious, but at the same time, you can't watch a race in that way and consider it prestigious, because it ends like that every year at this rate. So yeah, I'm becoming very fatigued by it.
Very fatigued by it. And the thing too, along with just a race where you have a run green regulation ends on lap 200, lap mile marker 500. When was the last time we saw hands down just best car win the race, the Daytona 500? I mean, thinking about it, this is again where you cannot compare the Indy 500 and the Daytona 500, but if you show up to Indianapolis 500 with a car and you just get in at 33rd qualifying position, you're very likely not going to win the race no matter what happens. You don't expect the top 15 cars to just crash out and have that kind of mess. And here it's, well, you could be ninth place. Everything goes wrong ahead of you, but you made it by and you're the winner. It has, in a way, I get the history behind it. You have some great Hall of Fame winners. And then there's just some winners are just so random. It's just, okay, circumstances got them the victory. In the chat room, Adam, to me, it was a good 500. Glad Ryan Preece walked away from that scary crash, and Kyle Busch as well. I just couldn't believe Kyle Busch got caught up in that crash. I was just like, really?
I am a little bit more surprised at how NASCAR handled that situation, at least from Kyle Busch's point of view. We don't know NASCAR's official reasoning yet, but if you go look at Kyle Busch's Twitter account, he explained pretty thoroughly what he thinks happened. And yeah, I was pretty disappointed to have my pick get taken out of the race because NASCAR just told him to get out of here. So yeah, pretty unfortunate result there for the two-time champion.
Yeah, so unfortunate. And that was a car that Richard Childress knows what to do for these super speedways. Him and Austin Dillon, bottom lane. Just a case of a couple drivers I may have not exactly been thinking. That crash took out several cars, including what we saw with Penske. Both Logano, Ryan Blaney, caught up in that crash. And one of those deals where with that crash and some of the other crashes, we saw essentially Ford and Toyota go from being so strong, the Penske drivers winning the first two stages, Toyota's having their cars up front, and then at the end, Chevrolet wins because really the Chevrolets sort of avoided some of the big crashes. I mean, just some interesting numbers. The Chevy drivers that led laps, you have William Byron, 10 laps, Alex Bowman, 11 laps. Then we get down to the single digits. Michael McDowell led 4 laps, Ty Dillon 3 laps, Chase Elliott 2, Hocevar 1. So only 33 laps led by a Chevy driver compared to Blaney, 23 laps, Cindric 53 laps, and Logano 43 laps, just from those three alone. Do you feel Ford and Toyota clearly have an advantage over the Chevy teams? And is this just the super speedways, or could this be each week?
I stated it very boldly in my preseason predictions that Chevy is going to have a down year this year. And that looked even more apparent last night when even Kyle Larson, one of the most dominant drivers of the last 5 years, wasn't even able to make noise at any point last night. Like, think about last night's broadcast, all 8.5 hours of it. Kyle Larson was not brought up one time during racing action. He was mired in the mid-pack for the entire race. Now, obviously, Kyle Larson is not known for his super speedway prowess. We are very well aware of that. But at the same time, even at last year's Daytona race in the summer, he was a contender despite being involved in multiple accidents. So it was a bit surprising for me to see, like, Carson Hocevar was never involved in the race. I thought that after last year's event ending for him as early as it did, that he would come back and have a much stronger showing, but I guess that they never really fixed that problem that they found in the dual race that kind of had him lagging back in that race as well. So Michael McDowell was never really a factor in the race. Justin Haley, never saw him up front. I mean, obviously, 3/4 of Trackhouse got taken out in that massive accident on the restart when Joey Logano's engine sputtered. So we don't really have like an indication on how well their entire team was going to look. But Daniel Suarez was strong at times. But if you look at all the Hendrick cars, the only ones that were consistently up front were Elliott and Bowman. Byron was there from time to time. Like, he took control towards the beginning of the race and led a little bit under that first caution for rain. But yeah, like, even RCR wasn't like insanely strong. They definitely were able to like link up there towards the end of the race on the bottom row, but unfortunately that's what kind of got them into trouble at the very end, because they, you know, were in that 5th to 25th range that is known as the danger zone, and yeah, they unfortunately got wiped out in that large accident that triggered overtime. So yeah, I'm a little bit more confident in Toyota's ability right now to produce a super speedway car over Chevy, and I genuinely never thought I'd say that.
Toyota was looking really good. The Fords are, I think, the top, at least the Penske's. It's just a matter of, well, I mean, all three of them got involved in some sort of crash. Cindric, the very last one. Then you had RFK. They were pretty good, but
were they? Because I didn't really see Brad Keselowski contend at all yesterday. He was a non-factor, which was surprising to me considering his strength at these tracks. Buescher ran up there a little bit, but Preece, I think, was trying to like preserve his car for the end, and unfortunately, that opportunity got taken away from him. So, yeah, it was weird to not see RFK really perform at the level that I thought they would. I mean, we all came into yesterday's pre-race show pointing to Buescher and Keselowski being like pretty strong contenders to possibly mix it up at the end, and they just never really arrived.
Yeah, I feel overall Preece was there a little bit. Buescher, I think, was the more out of the RFK cars trying to do something. But then the Toyota drivers, I mean, what would have been for Eric Jones if he did not get in that damage from Ryan Preece? John Hunter Nemechek, they made it through the direct crash, and of course Jimmy Johnson. That has to feel pretty good for them. Now, since we've been talking a little bit about Ryan Preece, of course, this is one of the big stories. That video of that crash, I've never seen, I can't recall seeing a Cup Series car do that at all, front facing. I've seen it where they've gone airborne, but he come back down. But Ryan Preece was definitely frustrated after the race. The media went up to him after he was cleared from the infield care center, and he was just very critical, saying that when that car started going up and it got silent, he starts thinking about his 2-year-old daughter. And he seemed quite shaken up from this experience. Overall, I know we talked about this very first question on Roundtable in our 2025 predictions about these blowovers, getting airborne, the hard hits when you land. There was no grass this year, but overall, thoughts on that crash and what Ryan said?
Yeah, I saw someone on Blue Sky post last night that, well, they got rid of the grass, car still flipped, so what are we going to do, pave the air now? Just thought that was a pretty funny little quip, but I I think that you have to start looking at the underbody of the car. We did not have these kind of awkward incidents like this until we smooth the underbody of the car out. And at a certain point, you can only do so much to the outside and the top of the car before you have to look at what is probably causing the problem. And it's the thing that's causing the problem at practically every racetrack. So I know that they're locked into these massive agreements with these parts manufacturers to, keep everything homologated with the next gen car, but at a certain point, you've got to say enough is enough. Now, granted, I'm not as disturbed by the crash like how Mike Joy very clearly was. Mike Joy seemed very shaken up watching that crash, and understandably so. I have never seen a NASCAR hop a wheelie and then continue and then flip over. I've never seen that before, and I've been watching since 2001. And that's saying something, considering that's almost a quarter century of races that are under my belt. So, yeah, I definitely think the underbody, especially at the super speedways, needs to be taken into account. And at the same time, I'm just really glad to see Ryan Preece walk away yet again. I hate that he keeps finding himself in the R&D room at NASCAR with his race cars. I mean, you go back to the 2023 spring Talladega race where he ran into Kyle Larson's side, and that, was a massive accident that exposed Larson's roll cage. And then you flash forward to Daytona that same summer, and he has that just awful wreck down the back straightaway, which made them remove the grass. And now he's found himself to be the first NASCAR driver to wheelie into a barrel roll. So I definitely think that NASCAR would be wise to, especially going into Atlanta, another style track like this, to really take a hard look at the underbody of these cars, especially as the year goes on, because, I mean, Talladega is even bigger than this, even wider than this. So I don't know. It's definitely not something that gives me like grave concern, but what does make me even more concerned is the side of the cars. Obviously, we saw at the Clash, Ty Gibbs be able to ramp up the side of Justin Haley's car because they basically bumped wheels, kind of like how IndyCar used to back in the early days of the IRL, which caused a number of very horrifying incidents. And I do not, under any circumstances, want that to happen in NASCAR. It has happened too many times where we get into the catch fence, and I really just do not want to see Le Mans 1955 happen again. So, yeah, like let's find out something to keep these cars somewhat on the ground, or at least from like propelling upward in the rate that Ryan Preece did last night, because that can't happen again.
Yeah, it was. I've been watching this since the 90s, and I can remember at times where you have a weird case where the wheels, just the way it is, Bristol comes to mind, where the car could hit the wall, get on the side. We've seen it even the 2000s, but just from an impact to get airborne like that, and you have nothing to help you. The roof flaps, they're not designed to deploy when you're forward going. Ryan Preece was a little bit crooked, and as soon as that air just got under the body, up it went. And it would have been scary just the thought if he was just a little higher up the track, start getting airborne, getting closer to that catch fence, as he said, enter that turn 3 wall. I mean, it's just, I just sort of at the point where it is getting a bit concerned, because it seems to be what Kevin Harvick said, when that car hits at a certain spot, it almost like the driver could really feel that impact, like it almost goes through you. And that's not good at all, especially car hit on the roof or just at an angle. I mean, we were all very impressed with how Josh Berry was okay after that flip over and hitting the wall upside down. I do agree with you. I think NASCAR has to say, hey, okay, super speedways, the easy fix will be slow the cars down, but then you're just going to have these bigger packs, and we're going to have, I think, the same kind of racing product of 3-4 wide because nobody could get away from each other. But the teams are always going to find ways to get faster and faster in these crashes. And wasn't that because at the first thought, when I saw the crash occurring, I was thinking maybe he got on top of Eric Jones' car a little bit. But that was not the case at all. He was just collecting the air and went over. I mean, this isn't a case of somebody pushing you like sometimes Harrison Burton's crash where he rolled over the first airborne car. A lot of folks, well, he was getting pushed as he was getting sideways. This was not the case, and I think this is something NASCAR needs to really look into because that drivers are not going to be happy about seeing another car roll over, and if NASCAR has to do something about it, it's just back to the R&D center for Ryan Preece. That team car going to be there, and NASCAR is going to have their work cut out of what they could do now. One car, I think it's going to be safe for a long time. It has to be Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s number 40 Traveler Whiskey Chevrolet. First race in 9th place finish. Justin Allgaier avoided the crash. He got a little damage on one of the earlier crashes. A quiet day, not too flashy. Came home in one piece. I saw Dale Jr. post-race online, I believe from Noah Lewis or the front stretch, how this is huge for that team. And overall, how much do you feel this is going to help Junior Motorsports grow and someday become that full-time Cup Series team?
I'm going to be pretty brief with this response. Until Dale Jr. allows himself to open his wallet for a charter, this is just pie in the sky. So, I mean, I hate to be that blunt about it because personally, I would love if Dale Jr. was at the highest level as a Cup car owner. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to want to put in the financial commitment necessary to become a Cup Series owner, which that's his prerogative. And I'm not going to criticize him for that because it is his money. But at the same time, you can't say things like, oh, we want to be here, we want to race at Cup. You can't just keep saying that for X amount of years without people just getting tired of you just saying things, which is the same thing that happens with Steve Phelps when he's talking about the 4th, and now a mystery 5th manufacturer has entered the fray potentially. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something that I see being likely unless something like cataclysmic happens, and that would be something akin to 2311 and Front Row losing the lawsuit and their charters as a result. And NASCAR like repossessing them. So that's kind of my concern. We don't really have a whole lot of spots left on the grid for them to really buy into. The one thing I could see happening, and this is I haven't heard anything relating to this. This is just a complete shot in the dark. Hayek Motorsports is a one-car Chevy team that just lost a massive amount of funding. I'm not trying to put anything on Ricky Stenhouse's job by any stretch, but if Dale Jr. wanted to get in, he would probably have to buy somebody else's team out or something to that effect to really buy into the sport at that level. and I just don't see him doing it anytime soon.
That's the thing, like you said. Dale Jr. has been talked about for a long time, but it's just you gotta take that dive, you gotta take that leap in to make that investment. And I know it's with this charter system, there is that potential we saw with Chip Ganassi and other teams that sold their charters for a lot more money compared to pre-charter, where you had some big teams that then just sold for pennies, like Junior Johnson Racing back then, Robert Yates Racing, teams that were at one point dominant, then just fell behind the times and couldn't sell for much. So I always get the sense Junior's careful about that. If anything, I think this was just something that shows, okay, you all should get to that point. It's like, okay, I think that's a great point you bring up about the 47, getting that charter, make that a plan for one car, then maybe two, and so on. But they are getting scarce, the charters. Not just going to add in the value. One thing I will say, though, that I feel has been really great to see since last Memorial Day weekend last year, Justin Allgaier, I feel this driver was with Penske in the Xfinity Series, then comes to the Cup, rookie season, goes back to Xfinity, goes with Junior, been with Junior's Motorsports for quite some time. It seems like this almost was a big rewarding moment for him and Junior together, and just the thought of what he's been through with his career, Allgaier. He got a lot of praise for driving Kyle Larson's car very well in that rain-shortened Coca-Cola 600. I almost got a sense that maybe add a little bit of more confidence, more boost to him, because then he goes out there, finally gets that championship, and he's the first driver for Junior Motorsports to go in the Cup Series. Comes home with top 10 finish. I think that just has to feel really good for him. Just the fact that everything he's been through, him and Junior, they got a good working relationship, and I think he'll be there quite some time, maybe to a point where he decides, hey, I've had a good career, or if some great opportunity in Cup Series, but he seems to be set on he needs a really good ride. Just don't go with any team like a Rick Ware race or a small team. And I think he'll really now prove he could do stuff behind the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like the entirety of their speed weeks, this was obviously a success for them, and a really big deal for Allgaier and Dale Jr. I think that Allgaier is what I would consider a Cup level talent. It's just that he's never really had the circumstances surrounding him to really give him a good opportunity. I believe he was an H. Scott Motorsports Equipment, which, as we saw with Clint Boyer in 2016, wasn't exactly the greatest equipment available. So I definitely think Allgaier would be wise to keep running Xfinity as long as he can. I mean, he's the defending champion of the series after 9 long seasons with Junior Motorsports. He finally was able to claim that crown. And I just feel like at this point of his career, he's probably not going to get that Cup opportunity unless Dale Jr. moves up and he needs somebody who has funding bringing along with them. So, yeah, it was a great moment for Allgaier. I would like to see this team, before they try to commit to being like a fully chartered team at some point, I'd like to see them race at a couple other tracks just to see, just more so to check the temperature. Like, this is our baseline. We don't have any notes on this track. We're taking what we can from Hendrick Motorsports as part of an alliance with them and doing what we can. I would like to see them take on Darlington, Phoenix. Like, Allgaier loves Phoenix, clearly. I would love to see them take on some more traditional circuits to round themselves out before they really start to think about buying a charter and making this a full-time thing.
Darlington, that would easily be a track. Dale Jr., his love of the history of the sport, a Southern 500. And I know we talked a little bit about the crown jewel status of the Daytona 500. I feel Darlington is one of those races. It keeps that crown jewel status because it is so hard to win because you got to race to racetrack. You got to have a good car. You can't just find yourself ninth place and then 9 cars crash ahead of you at Darlington. That's not going to happen.
No. And not a single driver has lucked into a Southern 500. Not a single one. That you have to really earn it dancing with the lady in black.
Yep. So Junior Motorsports, if they are at Darlington, I could see that being a huge deal for Dale Jr. And it'll be interesting because then we could really see what that car is capable of. Because overall, 9th place, take that. I was surprised there was very little mention of him, or no mention at all in the broadcast during the race coverage that I could recall of.
He didn't quite really make it up to the front at any point, but that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about not being able to make it out of the middle of the pack if you're stuck there because everybody's just saving gas. So
saving fuel, waiting for the end. Unfortunately for some, the end did not go as they wanted to. And 2 drivers that some folks have been critical of, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Cole Custer. Now, of course, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., he and Logano got together, setting off that big crash with 15 laps to go. A lot of folks were wondering, Joey Logano claims Stenhouse appeared indecisive. He didn't make his mind up of what lane he wanted to do, try to self-clear himself. Case of Cole Custer, he was pushing Christopher Bell. When we saw that car was squirrely, come back around the second time, gets him at a wrong angle. That caused Bell to crash into Preece. Preece goes airborne. Then later on, last lap, Custer, it seemed like he was really trying to be very aggressive, side drafting Denny Hamlin. But at the same time, I just sort of don't understand because there was another car in there and that just got Cole, turns into Denny Hamlin. Now, both of them are single car teams. They're not going to be in winning equipment week in and week out. So Daytona, the super speedways are their really best opportunities. And Ricky Stenhouse, he's one of the super speedways, but he has this reputation for super aggressive moves and unfortunately causing wrecks. And Cole Custer, well, we know his career. Came to the Cup Series, got that 1 win in Kentucky. Nothing really going on. Goes back to Xfinity. Now is back again. He's really trying to prove he belongs in the Cup Series. Do you feel both drivers were at fault for the incidents they were involved in?
Ricky Stenhouse, to me, is absolutely 100% at fault for that first incident. And it does not bring me joy to say that because I know a lot of people that listen to this program probably hate Joey Logano and want to pin the crash on him. But let's look at the facts of the situation. They started out in the top lane where the middle lane was completely free and open to tackle. So Joey Logano, in his infinite wisdom, gets a run through 1 and 2, ducks below the 47, and the 47 throws an egregious block in the middle of a turn, which usually results in an accident, and I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen there. And then he continues to try blocking Logano, and where people blame Logano in this is that they're like, oh, well, he kept trying to force the issue. That's not the case. You look at his own board, and you look at any of the exterior replays of that crash, he's letting off the throttle, but he's still going forward because Noah Gragson and the entire line behind him is still trying to push him forward. So I don't really see how Joey Logano has any fault in that accident when the car that was trying to block 3 lanes of traffic was the one that eventually triggered the crash. So, yeah, Ricky Stenhouse deserves every bit of criticism he's going to field this week, and he'll probably incur some next week because, unfortunately, this is just kind of the reputation that he's built for himself. They call him a certain nickname for a reason, and that's all I'm going to say about that. As far as Cole Custer is concerned, I have a little bit more leniency. I have not known Cole Custer to kind of drive like a dart without feathers, so to speak. I have known for him to, at regular racetracks that aren't, devolving into pack racing, I've known him to be aggressive, but at super speedways, I've never known him to be a particularly reckless risk taker. He tends to mind his own business and push the car ahead of him at a responsible rate. Now, here's the thing. The Daytona 500 is laying in the balance. You've got to push at that point of the race. And if you don't push, you are going to get pushed and get wrecked yourself. That's how it's always been. I know that Denny Hamlin would like to say that he didn't have to push Christopher Bell, but if he doesn't push Christopher Bell and he lets off the throttle, he probably gets shipped into the wall just like Bell did, and everything else happens just like it happened in the actual crash. So to me, it kind of felt like a horse of the piece situation. It was either, push and hope for the best or get pushed and hope for the best. And Custer kind of, just gave an awkward push at a time where it was not good for Christopher Bell's car, and an unfortunate accident occurred. I don't really put any fault on anyone in that crash, but everybody has to point the finger at somebody, and I guess that the hand was pointing at Cole Custer in that one. As for the last crash of the race, the second that Cole Custer had a somewhat direct hand in, I can't really blame him for that one either. I felt that, yes, he was trying to probably side draft, but it looked to me like Chase Briscoe comes up and clips his quarter panel and turns him down. Like, I'm not sure if the 41 was coming down and the 19 was also coming up. It could have just been a meeting in the middle situation, but to me, that one, I can't really point the finger at him completely. The whole situation was kind of jumbled up, and I'm sure his spotter may not have gotten to him in time. It's just a terrible circumstance, and I mean, he paid the price for it. It's not like he won the race. We've seen guys cause these massive accidents and win. We saw it last year. So I struggle to really point the finger at Custer in either of his situations because there was plausible deniability in my mind. But with Stenhouse, it seemed pretty clear that, like, you could have just gone back up to the top instead of continuing to block the 22, and instead you continued to block him for a quarter of a lap and killed half the field. So,
yeah, the Stenhouse move, not impressive at all. And Custer, I think, like you said, he doesn't cause these kind of messes occurring. If anything, when I saw Denny Hamlin's tweet and what Cole Custer said, I had to agree with you. It's like if he was laying off on Christopher Bell, somebody was just going to then spin him around. Then we'll be talking about, oh, well, Cole Custer hit the wall and caused a crash. So it's just one of those things with this nature of the Daytona 500, such a big race. Winning this race is going to do a lot for your season and the team. And then just pushing and pushing. And at the end, it's just you get this mess. And Stenhouse, considering the crash he was in, he still came out ahead of a lot of folks. The points standing as after the Daytona 500. Ricky Stenhouse up there in 15th. Some of the surprises, of course, we know William Byron, he got to win. He's locked in the playoffs. Ryan Blaney leading the standings. He got those stage points. Good race weekend overall. Came home still in the 7th place, which is a surprise. But some of the bigger surprises, especially drivers that did not make the playoffs, Chris Buescher, Eric Jones, John Hunter Nemechek, Chase Briscoe, Ty Dillon, Michael McDowell, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., all in the top 16, all missed the playoffs last year. Could any of them put together a run to get into the playoffs with a win or consistency, in your opinion?
Let's look at the grid here. I'm leaning towards no. To put it flatly, I don't see, like, if we're talking about all the drivers that didn't make the playoffs that are currently in the playoffs right now, we have Buescher, Eric Jones, Jimmy doesn't count, John Hunter, Ty Dillon, McDowell, Stenhouse, who did win a race last year, and Ty Gibbs didn't win a race. Yeah, out of those 7, I mean, obviously I think Ty Gibbs will make the playoffs, and I think Buescher will as well. But the only one I could see out of that group maybe pointing their way in is maybe McDowell. And obviously we don't have any idea how good Legacy is going to be at any of the regular tracks, but Eric Jones might, if they have even remotely okay speed, might be able to make the postseason. But yeah, I mean, none of these drivers are really in strong enough equipment, and you know the old saying, somebody has to run 29th, 31st, places like that. Like somebody has to be in the back of the pack. And I don't know. I just don't see Ty Dillon like replicating this performance. I mean, he didn't even really make it to the finish last night for one reason or another. So yeah, I'm not particularly concerned that one of these guys is going to bust people's playoff brackets, but yeah, it's not looking likely that some of these guys are going to be hanging up in this area for too long.
It's always the case where you'll have drivers that have Daytona, good finish, then they fall down the stands as the season goes on. We saw that in the Winston Cup era, Nextel Sprint Cup. I think most of them are going to start falling down. If anything, curious to see how Eric Jones and that Legacy Motor Club's going to do. He could get a win at Darlington. He likes that track. The super speedways, it's a super speedway. Good luck to everyone. And that's really everyone's best bet, because Ty Dillon, I do not anticipate Ty Dillon to be contending for a win on the 1.5 miles with Colleague Racing. I mean, no. Colleague, their main driver, LJ Allmendinger, went out early, so there's issues going on with that team. And overall, it'll be really interesting to see Stenhouse, of course, again, the speedways, but some of the drivers that haven't got a win, Ty Gibbs, I think as soon as he gets that win, I say all these drivers are getting win. I mean, you got Denny Hamlin outside, Joey Logano. They're just going to get pushed down and out of the top 16. Really, maybe Legacy, particularly Eric Jones and Chris Buescher, I think will be the ones safely in. Of course, next week they'll be at Atlanta Motor Speedway for the second race of the year for the NASCAR Cup Series. And I encourage everyone to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our pre-race programs for that and the wrap-up show. Now, before we wrap up our show, a couple quick little recaps. Formula E, doubleheader weekend. Oliver Rowland nearly swept the full weekend with a second-place finish in the first race after a last lap pass by Max Gunther, and first place in the second race. He leads the Formula E standings overall. 4 races, 3 podiums, 2 wins. One of the best seasons he's off to. For Nissan, this is huge because he has a 17-point lead over second place Taylor Bernard, a rookie. Nissan also leads the manufacturers and team standings. Next race will be in Miami E-Prix, and I think this is going to be a big test for everyone because while Oliver Rowland has been off to such a great start, the competition, that inconsistency that Formula E is known for, is starting to bite everyone. Antonio Felix da Casa, ninth place finish, and then caught up in a crash. Nick Cassidy, since Portland last year, nothing. He finally got his first top 10 finish of the year in the second race at Jeddah, and Jaguar has dropped from being essentially first race winner with Mitch Evans of the year to now seventh in the team standings, fourth in the manufacturers. They are just dropping down. Jaguar, really interesting to see that powertrain just not living up. Nissan, Porsche seems to be the top two. Gonna be really interesting to see what Jaguar can do. And then World Rally Championship, Rally Sweden was this weekend as well. Elfyn Evans, he is back after a quiet 2024 season. He takes the win, and he has a 28-point lead in the stands over his teammate Sebastian Ogier, who's, of course, running part-time. Kali Rafa Pera is third place out of the full-time drivers in the World Rally Championship standings. Next race is March 19th and 23rd, Safari Rally Kenya. I've been saying this since last year. Elfyn Evans needed to show up. He did. Each day he ended on top, the fastest. Saturday, when it looked like Autonic or maybe his teammate was going to get around him, he again kept everything together, kept the lead, and just had a great, solid weekend. What he needs to do to prove he could get that championship and try to be the third Toyota driver to get a championship with Toyota Gazoo Racing and World Rally Championship. Now, before we go off the air, we'll bring back Tanner for our shining moment. Encourage everyone in the chat room, share your shining moment. And for a race where we feel it sort of feels like something's missing, there has to be some shining moments. What stood out to you, Tanner?
You've got to look at Jimmy Johnson. Like, this is a man that has toiled away at trying to make Legacy Motor Club a strong and reputable race team since joining the club in 2023, and they suffered through that lame duck year in 2023 with Chevy before moving to Toyota with no notes and data going into 2024. And God, anytime I'd see that car or any of their cars hit the racetrack, it always just sounded like their engines were off. So it was really nice to see not only Jimmy make the show on speed, which is a massive statement compared to last year, but show a lot of speed in the dual race before he had some sort of like fuel injection issue in the dual race that kind of took him out of contention, but he was able to help his teammate Eric Jones compete for that win. And then to come into the Great American Race, he was firmly in the mix before that final pit stop. He was third in the middle line before that debris caution came out, and then he kind of got caught between two cars on pit road that were, boxing him in his box. So he had to back into his pit box and basically completely ruined his momentum and chance at the win. And then by the time the final restart for overtime came about, he was in about 13th to 15th, so he wasn't really in a position to win the race, and he was able to very deftly navigate his way through that massive collision to come home with a third place finish and, completely lead his team to great results. John Hunter Nemechek had a top 5 as well. And Eric Jones, despite the damage, was able to come back for, I believe, 12th. So all around a great day for Legacy Motor Club. I'm glad that I I took them as my best bet of the mid-pack teams during our pre-race coverage with Matthew yesterday. And I'm glad that Jimmy has finally gotten a great result, not only for him, but for his race team to, kind of lift their spirits after an extremely rough 2 years.
Very rough 2 years for Jimmy. That was a great shining moment. I have a couple shining moments from across the motorsport world. Formula E, Max Gunther's last lap pass on the last chicane. What a move on the outside, making that stick, getting Oliver rolling. That stood out. Elfyn Evans, World Rally Championship, making a statement, just leading each day. when he did lose the lead during the days a little bit, he came back to end the day on top. And then from the Daytona 500, it's hard to beat Legacy Motor Club. That is just a great story for them to be 7th, 8th, 9th in the points. Jimmy Johnson, 3rd place. That has to be positive momentum and hopefully a better season for them because Toyota would love to see more Toyotas up in the front. Overall, great effort by them. And next race, Atlanta. Subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss our program next week. For Tanner Smith, I'm Joe Samaniego. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. And don't forget, Grid Encore tonight with Ben and Brandon. They got a lot more to talk about Daytona. Take care, everyone.